She slapped a black man in court right across the face only to find out he was the judge. He didn't yell. He didn't fight back. He just looked her in the eye and everything started to unravel. What happens when the person you thought was beneath you turns out to hold all the power? If you've ever questioned how justice really works, in silence, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's uncover the moment a single act exposed an entire system. It was supposed to be a routine morning. Courtroom 3A in the Summerfield County Courthouse buzzed with the quiet energy of legal ritual. The bailiff sipped his second coffee, the young public defender shuffled through her case files, and the defendant, a teenage boy no older than 17, sat quietly, hands folded in his lap, eyes bouncing between the clock and the exit sign. A minor drug possession case. Nothing unusual. The kind of hearing that comes and goes without headlines or history. And then she walked in. Officer Vanessa Croll. To some, she was a symbol of discipline. Decorated, respected, polished to the last button. To others, especially those who remembered her name from the complaints that never went anywhere. She was the system's clenched fist. She didn't greet the clerk, didn't glance at the judge's bench. She just scanned the room like she owned it. Her eyes caught something and locked on. A tall black man, sharply dressed, stood near the witness stand. He was speaking quietly with one of the attorneys, hands behind his back. Posture, calm, unthreatening. And yet Vanessa's jaw tightened. She moved 5 stiff, deliberate steps across the courtroom floor, and then it happened. She slapped him, a full force blow across the face. The sound sliced through the courtroom like a whip crack in a church. Gasp! One woman in the back clutched her chest. A boy near the front row whispered, "Did that just happen?" Papers fell. A pen rolled across the floor untouched. The court reporter dropped her hand from the machine. The room froze, not in confusion, but in disbelief. The man stood motionless, then calmly adjusted his tie, brushed his cheek, and turned to look her in the eye. "I'm Judge Miles Daryl," he said, voice low but steady, "and I'll be presiding over this courtroom today." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was charged. It pressed down on every shoulder in that room like a weight. You could feel people holding their breath, afraid even to blink. Vanessa didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes darted toward the bench, the clerk, the gallery. Her breath caught short. Her face didn't flush. It drained. In her mind, the slap still made sense. For a split second, she had believed she was right, that she'd stopped a disruption, that she was restoring order. But now she wasn't sure what order meant anymore. She turned to the bailiff as if waiting for him to jump in, but he only looked away, and then it hit her. No one was moving to protect her. In the front row, the public defender, no more than 27 years old, slowly reached for her phone. She didn't raise it high, just enough to capture, then another hand, then another. 4 phones recording, quiet, deliberate. Daryl didn't call for security. He didn't raise his voice or throw his title around. He just said, "We'll take a 10-minute recess," and walked away. No footsteps echoed louder than his did in that moment. Behind him, Vanessa Croll stood rooted to the same spot. Right hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from realization. A woman near the back stood up to leave, then thought better of it, and sat down again, eyes wide. The teenage defendant leaned forward, staring not at the judge, but at Vanessa. His mouth didn't move, but the message was clear in his eyes. This changes everything. Even the walls seemed to be listening. And outside the courtroom, the rest of the building carried on like nothing had happened. But inside room 3A, history had just cracked open. Not with a gavel, but with a slap. Courtroom 3A didn't return to normal. Even after Judge Daryl had disappeared into his chambers, the room didn't breathe again. The air sat heavy. The silence was no longer shock. It was recognition. Something irreversible had just happened, and no one quite knew how to move forward from it. The teenage defendant shifted nervously in his seat, eyes darting to the gallery, then to the bailiff as if asking, was this part of the process? Vanessa Croll didn't move. Her hand, her right one, the one she'd used, trembled just slightly at her side. Not enough for everyone to notice, but enough for her to feel it. From the back, someone whispered, "Did she really just?" A voice answered lower like a hiss. She slapped a sitting judge in his own courtroom. The words moved like smoke. Quiet, invasive, impossible to grab. You could feel the weight shifting in the room, the quiet judgment in glances exchanged, the sudden awareness of phones still held in hands, still recording. And then someone said it, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She just slapped the presiding judge. It didn't matter who said it. The sentence landed like a gavel. By the time Judge Daryl's door clicked shut behind him, the first video was already uploading. No filter, no edits. Just raw, shaky footage of a white officer in full uniform slapping a black man only to find out he was the judge. In less than an hour, the clip was on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. By the second hour, it had a title, "Cop Slaps a Judge Doesn't Know He's the Judge." Within minutes, hundreds of comments rolled in. She thought he was a defendant. That's the problem. That wasn't a mistake. That was muscle memory. Tell me again how racism isn't systemic. Back in the hallway, Officer Croll finally moved. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't ask for direction. She just stood there, face locked tight, breathing shallow. Someone tried to catch her eye, a young male officer, but she turned away before he could say anything. She could feel it. The ground beneath her wasn't steady anymore. Meanwhile, inside Judge Daryl's chambers, everything was still. The room was modest dark wood shelves, a coffee machine in the corner, a framed photo of his 3 sons at a college graduation. No lavish desk, no towering bookcases, just quiet space and perspective. Daryl sat down behind his desk. For a moment, he did nothing. He didn't sigh. He didn't reach for his phone. He just sat there, elbows resting on the armrests, hands folded, staring at nothing. A gentle knock broke the stillness. His clerk, Monique Barnes, stepped in, clutching the folder she'd meant to deliver before the incident. She didn't say anything at first. Her eyes scanned his face, quietly searching for any trace of emotion. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up slowly. His expression was unreadable. Calm but not distant, present. "I'm fine," he said. She hesitated, then stepped further in, closed the door behind her. "We should file something," she said. "Press charges. The footage is already everywhere." He nodded once, then leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. "We could," he replied, "but I want to see how the system handles it first." Monique blinked. "You mean the department?" He nodded again, "the whole system." She stared at him, brows tightening. "You're just going to wait." He didn't flinch. "I want to know if it still refuses to hold itself accountable, if it'll act only because it's watched, or if it still expects silence to clean up the mess." Monique folded her arms, shifting her weight. "That's a gamble." "I know." They both sat in silence for a moment. Then Monique placed the folder gently on his desk. "For what it's worth," she said, "you handled it better than I ever could have." Daryl offered a small, tired smile. "You don't work this long in public defense without learning how to hold your breath." Outside, the courthouse had become a pressure cooker. The press hadn't arrived yet, but whispers had. Clerks were texting friends. Interns were updating group chats. A court stenographer called her cousin in media. Inside the courtroom, the public defender had already emailed the video to 3 advocacy groups and Officer Croll. She stood alone near the stairwell, back straight, arms stiff. The uniform that had once granted her automatic authority now felt heavy, like it didn't fit the moment, like it didn't belong to someone who had just publicly crossed a line. No badge could excuse. Her jaw clenched as she pulled out her phone. 5 missed calls, 2 from the precinct, 1 from her union rep, 1 from her sister, and 1 from an unknown number she didn't dare return. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering, but didn't call anyone back. The truth hadn't hit her yet, not fully, but her body knew before her brain did. She'd made a mistake the badge couldn't shield, and everyone had seen it. Before she was the officer in that courtroom, Vanessa Croll was someone the department proudly held up as a model of tough policing. She graduated from the academy at 22, barely old enough to rent a car, yet already marked for fast tracking. Tall, intense, no nonsense. The kind of recruit who didn't blink at late-night patrols in high-risk neighborhoods. She spoke little but acted fast. That got attention. Within a year, she was promoted to narcotics detail. 2 years later, she joined a tactical unit focused on gang suppression. By 26, Vanessa Croll was on posters, literally. She'd been featured in a Women in Law Enforcement campaign, her photo front and center, uniform, crisp sunglasses on arms crossed beside a cruiser. The public saw a rising star, but those inside the department saw something else. She wasn't just fast-moving, she was untouchable. Complaints came in early. A black teenager claimed Croll slammed him onto a squad car hood for talking back during a traffic stop. The boy had no record. His mother filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. The report disappeared within the week. Then came the grocery store incident. Latina woman, 2 children pulled out of her minivan, accused of shoplifting. Despite no cause, a search found nothing. The woman sobbed. Croll shrugged. No body cam footage was ever recovered. She was aggressive, one dispatcher recalled later, but they said she got resolved. Eli McLean remembers it differently. He was 29, still new when he first rode alongside Croll in Patrol District 2. She moved like she had something to prove, Eli said years later. But it wasn't about justice, it was about control. He recalled a moment that stayed with him, a night call near the city train yards. A black male officer new to their team had spoken out during a group huddle, questioning Croll's aggressive frisk of a teenager who had only been standing outside a gas station. Vanessa didn't respond in the meeting, but later that night she found him in the hallway and shoved him hard against a locker. Eli saw it from around the corner. The officer didn't push back. He just lowered his eyes and walked away. "I should have said something," Eli whispered to Internal Affairs when he was finally interviewed years later. "But you don't speak against the system if you want to stay in it." At the time, he told himself it was just an isolated incident. It wasn't. The records, those that hadn't been scrubbed, painted a pattern. Between 2012 and 2019, Vanessa Croll was the subject of 16 civilian complaints: excessive force, racial bias, search without consent. Only one of those complaints made it past intake. None resulted in discipline. Why? Her name carried weight with leadership. She was the go-to for high-pressure operations. The hammer, some called her, and most importantly, she had the support of Chief Alan Forsett. In a speech at the precinct holiday banquet in 2020, he'd praised her openly. Some officers hesitate when things get messy. Not Vanessa. She knows how to get the job done, even when it means doing the hard, unpopular thing. That's what separates the real leaders from the rest. Behind closed doors, the meaning was even clearer. She played ball. She didn't ask questions, she didn't talk to reporters, and she made sure no one else did either. There were rumors, she kept files, things she overheard, things she saw. She hinted as much at precinct barbecues. "You think I don't know where the bodies are buried?" she once joked. Beer in hand, half this place only sleeps at night because I've got dirt on the other half. People laughed, but no one laughed too loudly. What the public didn't see, what the system protected, wasn't just her brutality, it was her confidence in impunity. She wasn't afraid of internal affairs. She invited investigations because they never went anywhere. She wasn't the glitch in the system. She was the product of it. Even Eli, now retired, couldn't quite say whether she was evil or just shaped that way. "She came into a broken department," he said quietly years later, "and instead of trying to fix it, she figured out how to ride it to the top." When asked why he didn't come forward sooner, Eli just looked down. "I did try once," he admitted, filed a soft complaint anonymously about a use of force incident she was involved in. "Next week, I was reassigned to desk duty. They said it was temporary. It lasted 9 months. So he kept his head down, like everyone else. Now, as the viral video of the slap exploded across news feeds, Eli watched from his kitchen table, mouth slightly open, spoon hanging in midair over a bowl of oatmeal. His wife came in and froze at the image on screen. "That's her," Eli said, voice hollow. "She finally went too far," his wife whispered. He nodded slowly, and this time everyone saw it. Meanwhile, inside the department, calls were being made. Messages left, emails marked urgent. But for once, there was no script to follow. The usual talking points, ongoing investigation, context pending, felt flimsy, because this time there was no ambiguity. This time the evidence didn't need interpretation. It just needed replaying. The house was quiet when Judge Miles Daryl walked in that evening. No lights on, just the warm amber glow from the lamp by the front window. Nadine had left it that way. She always did when he worked late. He slipped off his shoes, set down his briefcase, and moved to his usual spot at the end of the couch. For a long moment, he just sat there. No TV, no music, just silence. Then slowly he reached for the remote, opened his phone, and played the video. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, but this time he watched not as a judge, not even as the man who had been slapped, but as someone trying to understand what that moment had truly become. There it was, the courtroom, the slap. Her hand, his cheek, the way the air changed in the room. He didn't flinch in the video, but now watching it back, he let out a long breath he hadn't known he'd been holding all day. The power in that moment hadn't come from the action. It had come from his stillness. His eyes drifted from the screen. For a second, he wasn't in his living room anymore. He was 28 again, fresh out of law school, standing in a precinct hallway with a file in hand, explaining politely that his client hadn't been read his rights. The white officer across from him had looked him up and down and said, "You talk awful smart for a street boy." Daryl had smiled, not because he was okay with it, but because he'd already learned before the bar exam, before the courtroom, that survival sometimes looks like silence. That moment had followed him. So did others. The senior partner who once told him his tie was too loud for court, The judge who called him young man long after he earned the title counsel. The juror who refused to look him in the eye. He'd fought battles no one else saw, fought them not with rage but with restraint. Because he believed in something bigger than being right. He believed in being effective. Behind him, soft footsteps. Nadine entered the room wearing her robe and holding 2 mugs of tea. She didn't ask about his day. She just sat beside him, handed him one and watched the screen. After a minute, she said quietly, "You should have let them escort her out in cuffs." Daryl didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his mug down and clasped his hands. "She was wrong," Nadine said blatantly on camera. "That should have been enough for immediate arrest." He nodded slowly. "I know." She turned to face him. "So why didn't you?" He looked at her eyes calm, worn but clear. "Because I didn't want to become the story." He said, "I didn't want her violence to push me into a performance. I'm not here to punish her. I'm here to watch how they respond when the system sees itself." Nadine leaned back, cradling the mug. "You're not angry." "Oh, I'm angry," he said softly. "But I'm not here to act like a victim, so they can feel better punishing someone who looks like a rogue instead of fixing the system that built her." He paused, then added, "She didn't act that way out of impulse. She acted because somewhere along the way she was taught that a black man in a suit still couldn't be the judge." Silence. The kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Nadine reached over, rested her hand on his. "You always carry it better than I do," she said. "I don't carry it," he replied. "I just refuse to set it down in front of people who wouldn't understand the weight." They sat like that for a while. The video ended, looping back to the start. He didn't press play again. Outside, the world was still on fire. Commentators' headlines, social media outrage. The story had gone national. But inside that room, the real story was this. A man who had every right to rage chose stillness because he understood that power wasn't in volume, it was in control. Tomorrow, the news would continue. More clips, more reactions, panels, and think pieces. But tonight, Judge Miles Daryl stayed silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew when not saying something was louder. By morning, the video had a name, Slap the Judge. Not crafted by news outlets, not launched by activists. Just a simple hashtag typed beneath a shaky phone recording, then repeated, reposted, and reshared until it became a moment. Not just a moment of shock, a mirror. The clip didn't need commentary. It was raw, unfiltered, undeniable. A white officer slapping a black man in open court, then learning on camera that he was the judge. Some viewers gasped, others didn't. Because to many, especially black and brown Americans, it wasn't surprising. It was just finally seen. And when something long hidden becomes visible, people start speaking. The first story came from a single comment. A Latina mother user named Maria Sophie 75 posted beneath the video. "She did the same to me in 2016, pulled me out of my car in front of my kids. Said I was acting suspicious because I parked too fast. I reported it. They said there was no footage." The comment got 200 likes. Then 800. Then a news outlet reached out. By the next day, she was on a local podcast, her voice trembling as she recalled her 10-year-old daughter crying in the back seat asking, "Why is the police lady mad at us, Mama?" Then came a former student from the state university. He'd been stopped walking home one night near campus. No probable cause, just Vanessa's voice on dash cam saying college kids think they're invincible. His record was spotless. Still, he spent a night in holding charges dropped quietly. No apology. Now his clip, grainy muffled, was posted alongside the courtroom video under the caption, "Same badge, same attitude, different victims." One by one, the voices grew louder, but not through shouting, through patterns. Inside the department, tension cracked through the walls like old plaster. Emails flooded HR. Voicemails overflowed. Union reps paced hallways. They once strolled with confidence. And sitting in his car outside Precinct HQ, Officer Brett Halden stared at his steering wheel. He wasn't new. He wasn't old. 15 years on the force, most of them in silence. He'd worked with Croll, sat beside her in squad briefings, ate the same lukewarm pizza in the break room during night shift. He wasn't close to her, but he wasn't brave enough to oppose her either. She once called him soft in front of the unit after he let a homeless veteran go with a warning instead of a citation. He'd laughed along, said nothing. Now he watched her face loop endlessly on the news. Her eyes wild in the moment after the slap, and he wondered, what had his silence built? That night, Brett didn't sleep. He wrote an email to his captain, deleted it, wrote it again. Still didn't send. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old copy of an internal report from years ago, one where he'd quietly redacted a line to protect her. Just one line. Officer Croll acted within protocol. He'd written it. Now he wasn't sure he believed it ever had been. Back in the city, Vanessa Croll tried to fight back. Not with fists this time, but with narratives. She called a local conservative talk show hoping to plead her case. The host, once friendly, even flirtatious, sounded distant. Her voice shook as she spoke live on air. That man looked like he didn't belong by the bench. He wasn't introduced. He made a sudden movement. But by then, everyone had seen the video. No sudden movement. No threat. Just her assumption. Her reach. Her slap. Even her defenders were growing quiet. The talk show cut to commercial early. Later that night, the host tweeted, "We'll wait for more facts before forming an opinion," which in politics was just a polite way of saying, "You're on your own now." At home, Vanessa sat in silence. No uniform, no badge, just sweatpants and silence. The blinds were drawn. A news van idled across the street. She tried calling her old supervisor. He didn't answer. She texted her union rep. Read no reply. Even her precinct group chat had gone dark. And in that stillness, she remembered something she hadn't thought about in years. A girl 17 quiet picked up on suspicion of shoplifting at a mall. The girl had cried. Vanessa had laughed, called it a scare tactic. No one had questioned it. Now she wondered if that girl remembered. If she'd seen the video. If she too had shared her story. The silence she had once weaponized was now closing in. It didn't roar, it whispered. "We see you now." The hearing wasn't held behind closed doors. It wasn't tucked away in a municipal office or buried in bureaucratic delay. It was held in the Franklin County Municipal Assembly Hall, a space large enough for over 200 filled, nearly to capacity. Citizens, journalists, legal observers, former arrestees, officers, some in uniform, some not, lined the side walls, arms folded, jaws tight. At the center, a long table with 7 panelists, a retired judge, a community organizer, a civil rights attorney, a police union representative, a local pastor, a former public defender, and chairing them all, Miss Loretta Vaughn, small in stature, sharp in voice, and unshakable in presence. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, she tapped her gavel once. "This is not a criminal trial," she said. "It is a public examination of Officer Vanessa Croll's conduct, both recent and historic, as it relates to her fitness to serve in the system that enabled her." And then the testimonies began. The first to speak was a name no one had expected to hear. Marcus Reed, now 46 years old, clean-shaven. Quiet, wore a blue dress shirt and a trembling smile. 15 years ago, he'd been arrested for armed robbery. He served 8 years before new evidence overturned the conviction. Back then, the arresting officer had been Vanessa Croll. "I was on my way home from work," Marcus said into the microphone, voice tight with control. "Had just clocked out from the late shift at a metal shop." She said I matched a description. He paused, eyes darting toward Vanessa, who sat stone-faced, arms crossed. "She found a screwdriver in my back pocket. Said it was a weapon. Said I looked nervous. I was tired. I was working 2 jobs and trying to keep custody of my son." The room was silent. No coughs, no whispers. "I told the truth, but she didn't write it that way. The report said I confessed I never did. That confession never existed. A beat. I lost 8 years of my life. My son was 6 when I went in. He was 14 when I got out. And the thing that still breaks me," Marcus swallowed. "She never looked back." One by one, the stories continued. A university student now in her 30s described being tackled during a mistaken identity call. A middle-aged black man spoke of being pulled from his car at gunpoint for driving suspiciously near his own home. A mother described her teenage daughter being dragged out of a mall security office, humiliated for a theft she didn't commit. No charges, no apology. Vanessa sat still through it all. No tears, no notes. Just silence, the kind that no longer protected her. Then the chairwoman looked up. "We've had several scheduled testimonies," she said, "but one name has just been added." She tapped her pen. "Judge Miles Daryl." There was a quiet gasp in the room, not surprise but gravity. Daryl walked down the aisle slowly. No papers, no prepared remarks. He didn't take the podium. He simply stood beside the table, folded his hands and looked out. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," he began. "That's not why I took this bench. That's not why I stayed." His voice was even grounded. A presence more than a performance. "I'm here because I believe the truth matters. Because power without accountability becomes violence, and silence becomes complicity." He looked toward Vanessa. "I wasn't hurt by the slap. Not physically. What hurt was the fact that she didn't see me as someone who could possibly belong behind that bench. And what hurts more is knowing this wasn't the first time her judgment acted faster than her fact. He turned back to the room, but I didn't come here for vengeance. I came to remind us what justice is supposed to feel like, and what it should never feel like again. A pause. Justice is not fear. It's not punishment. It's not dominance. It's truth. It's dignity. It's the restraint we show because we cannot, the force we use because we want to. No applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, Vanessa's face broke just for a moment. Her jaw clenched tighter. Her fingers flexed. The first crack not of the system, but of self-awareness. After a brief recess, the panel returned. The recommendation was unanimous. Immediate and permanent removal from the force. Her badge revoked. Her pension under review. No criminal charges. Not yet. But the room didn't erupt. No one cheered because this wasn't victory, it was reckoning. And reckoning rarely feels like celebration. That night, headlines exploded. But in homes across the county, it wasn't the punishment that people remembered. It was Judge Daryl's words, his stillness, his warning. And for the first time in years, the courtroom that had buried so many truths had become a place where they finally rose again. The words came simply without drama. The board finds that Officer Vanessa Croll shall be permanently removed from the Franklin County Police Department, effective immediately. No gavel slam. No handcuffs, just a signature on paper and the weight of everything unspoken. Vanessa didn't protest. She didn't blink. She just stood, nodded once, and walked out of the assembly hall as if she were leaving a dentist's appointment. Not a career. Not a legacy. At precinct headquarters, the air was different. No one made eye contact as she walked through the side entrance. She didn't take the front door. Not today, not with reporters camped out on the sidewalk and officers pretending not to see them. She moved like muscle memory up the side stairs past the vending machines down the long hallway, lined with plaques and commendations. Her photo still hung on the wall of service for now. Inside her locker, the contents were sparse: a half-used bottle of aspirin, a pair of scuffed boots, a folded photo of her K-9 unit from years ago, before the commendations, before the investigations, before the silence had teeth. She placed everything into a cardboard box, no badge, that had already been turned in. Her uniform stayed on the hanger. She didn't wear it home. She wore jeans, an old gray hoodie, and a look of someone who'd aged 5 years in 5 days. As she walked out, no one said goodbye. Not Officer Blake, who used to save her a seat at morning briefings. Not Lieutenant Monroe, who once said she was the sharp edge the department needed. Not even her desk mate, who sat stiffly, eyes locked on a screen, pretending she wasn't there. The same woman they once called the Hammer. Now, just a ghost moving through a space that had already let go of her. Outside, no cameras caught her exit. She slipped into a borrowed car her own had been keyed the night before and pulled away in silence. No farewell party. No send-off speech. Just a name being erased. By that evening, her profile had been taken down from the department's internal system. Email deactivated, badge number listed as inactive. Internal records archived and sealed for review. She didn't trend online anymore. A newer scandal was already taking shape in another city. The cycle had moved on. But in Franklin County, something had changed. Not loudly, not overnight, but enough. The courthouse didn't forget. The community didn't either, and those who once feared her name now barely whispered it. Because when a symbol falls, it doesn't shatter, it fades. Quiet, undramatic, irreversible. In the end, Vanessa Croll wasn't taken down by a protest, not by a lawsuit, not even by Judge Daryl. She was undone by the one thing she never saw coming. Everyone stopped protecting her. It didn't happen overnight. No sirens, no front page banner. But if you look at closely, really looked, you could see it. The system in Franklin County was shifting, slowly but unmistakably. It started with a memo from the Chief Justice's office. Mandatory bias training for all active officers and court personnel. Not the checkbox kind, real training with accountability attached. Then came the review board. Not just a formality, they dusted off old complaints, including those once marked not sustained. Some cases were reopened, others were quietly settled, but the message was clear. No more silent stamps. And then came a name new but rising. Sienna Lowe Young Fierce, a public defender turned civil rights advocate. The kind of woman who knew how to speak and when not to. She'd sat in Judge Daryl's courtroom once as a law student, just observing. She remembered his pace, his precision, his refusal to let the courtroom become a stage. Now, years later, she was invited to join Franklin County's newly formed civic oversight panel, not because she had connections, because she had conviction. On her first day, she didn't give a speech. She carried a folder titled People They Forgot and laid it quietly on the table. Inside were names, dates, closed files, and questions that still didn't have answers. At a town hall meeting, weeks later, folding chairs filled the local rec center. No cameras, no live stream, just people. Old, young, black, white immigrant veteran. Some came curious, others came bitter, most came tired. Judge Daryl sat in the back row quietly, listening. Midway through the meeting, a woman in her 70s stood gray, curls, floral scarf, thick glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't yell, didn't shake. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. "I'm here for a policy." The room fell still. "I raised 3 boys in this county. Each one got stopped for something that never made sense. One for riding his bike at dusk, one for carrying a backpack, one for fitting a description." She took a breath. "Don't tell me it's better. Show me and write it." The audience murmured in agreement. And someone, no one remembers who, whispered, "That's what justice sounds like." In the days that followed, the phrase stuck, not shouted, just repeated. Justice isn't a headline. It's a hearing that finally listens. It's a file reopened after 10 years. It's a rookie officer asking, "Why?" instead of saying, "Yes, sir." And what of Judge Daryl? He returned to the bench quietly. Same courtroom, same wooden gavel worn smooth by time. But now every time he stepped into that room, there was a pause, a hush. Not out of fear, but respect. Not just for him, but for what he didn't do. He didn't demand revenge. He didn't seize the spotlight. He waited. He let the silence work. And because he did something cracked open in Franklin County, in the final days of summer, Sienna Lowe drafted a new policy, stricter oversight for officer conduct, whistleblower protections, and a clause simple but firm. The absence of a camera shall never be the absence of accountability. It passed unanimously. Judge Daryl didn't attend the vote. He was in his chambers finishing a sentencing memo. But when word reached him, he smiled. Not a wide grin, just enough to wrinkle the corners of his eyes. He stood, looked at the photo on his desk, his son's on a fishing trip, then at the bookshelf where a quote had been etched into a plaque by a former clerk. Justice doesn't need to raise its voice. It only needs people who refuse to stop listening. Because in the end, justice didn't roar in Franklin County. It whispered. And for once, the system heard it. If this story touched you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories. Justice isn't always loud, but it speaks through those who stand firm. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for being here.